Welcome back to the Fish Tank right here on the Miami Dolphins Podcast Network. Seth Levitt, a missing DJ Preach, but OJ Juice McDuffie is here. Juice, man, it's football season.
It's football season, man. Let's go.
Yeah, you fired up?
Yeah, you know I am, bro. You know I am, man. It's that time of year where now that I'm not playing, I'm happy that it's training camp.
Right.
You know?
You get excited for training camp when you don't have to
It's a lot
participate
different. Yeah, it's a lot
in
different.
training
That's
camp.
right.
Got it. Well, I'm excited because we are running it back. Rewind that. Ronnie Brown is back in the tank, but the tank looks a little bit different than the last time you were here, man.
Looks a lot different. But it looks great. It looks great, though. I mean, I'm digging the set. I mean, obviously, and you got to have one of the greats in the back. But, it looks good. It looks good. It feels good to be back.
But one thing that I noticed that we really didn't discuss last time was kind of your origin story, as they say. We talked a lot about you as a football player, but not your story growing up. And I think I was kind of blown away when we worked together on 23 Ways to Stop Youth Violence, where you kind of had your testimony and you told your story about growing up and some things you went through. And I had no idea. And so I don't know how much you're willing to share about that, but talk about, if you are willing to, growing up, the circumstances with your parents, and then you really kind of having a second family that maybe look a little different than your first family, and what that was like.
Yeah, man. It's funny. And when we start discussing topics or whatever, my son is about to start playing tackle football for the first time. And so I've been trying to dig in the archives and find a bunch of old movies, let him watch. We watched Rudy, we watched Remember the Titans.
Okay.
So last night, we sat down and we watched The Blind Side.
Oh, did you? Okay.
And so it was funny because—
I was going to say, if you said the program or something, like, no, don't watch the program.
Yeah, not yet. We're going to get there, though.
Okay. So The Blind Side.
And so it was funny because, I relate so much to that story. And I usually, obviously, everybody kind of knows now. Like, they know me, but they don't really know, like, background, upbringing, all of that stuff. And I think as athletes, a lot of guys, we all have a story to tell for the most part, whether it's coming from certain environments, socioeconomic backgrounds, whatever. But I just never discussed it. And so I touched base a little bit more, obviously 23 Ways. That gave me an opportunity to open up because I usually used to not have that conversation. But then as I've gotten older, I realized, through a lot of that stuff, we're able to touch people, or there are a lot of people with similar stories. And so, just watching that movie last night, I was like, golly, like there's so many similarities between, my upbringing, in just terms of, environment. I didn't grow up, I grew up in apartments, but then initially when I first grew up, I lived on Brown Road. We lived in a trailer. All my
Ronnie
relatives
Brown from Brown Road.
Yeah, so like all my, it was in Sugar Valley, it was the country, but all my neighbors were my family members. And then so, we eventually moved out of that, moved in an apartment. But just from a personal perspective, my dad, mom, sold drugs. And so there was a little issue there for a minute. Both of them got arrested. I moved in with my cousin. My brother was adopted unofficially, by a white family. And so it was a little different. And then just through sport, I met my god brother, Justin. And so it was very similar to The Blind Side. Obviously my mom lived with her, but the struggles, all of those things were, very similar in terms of upbringing. Obviously trying to make sure that she made everything available, aware that we needed. But it was just different. Like I didn't realize it growing up. Outside of, being jokes at the school, you didn't have the newer sneakers. I got my first pair of Jordans as a junior in high school. And so, after I wear them, washcloth, wash them off, put them back in the box.
That's right.
And so, those stories, but, through sport, I had a lot of opportunity to meet a lot of cool people. And so when I was age 6, I met my godparents, Chris and Andy Tripp, and everyone in Cartersville, obviously they know the story, but not many people outside of that, unless, we've kind of gotten to know each other, or, you've been around, and, whether it was senior day in high school, senior day in Auburn, the draft. So everybody's kind of like, oh man, who is this family? And so, you have
who
to
is
kind
this
of
white family?
Yeah.
Right.
And so, and I leave tickets for my god brother, and he'd show up, 5'8" white guy.
Right.
Hey, wait a minute, your brother was supposed, and so, I think there were so many similarities to that, I identify with, from a perspective of having someone to rely on, and just kind of seeing what the other side looked like in terms of, my parents, they did the best they could. My mom, she was a stickler for education, was always on me, made me redo my homework. So she was always on, manners, being a respectable person, representing your last name. But I always remember her saying was, do as I say and not as I do.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
especially at that point,
man.
right?
And so
Yeah.
that stuck with me, even
Yeah.
with their struggles and their trials and tribulations that they had. That was one of the things that kind of always stuck to me.
There's usually some driving factor that kind of, that began early in our lives that kind of pushes us to where we're at. You know what I mean? And after hearing that story, tell me how that part growing up pushed you to where you got in life in terms of, high school, college, obviously in the pros, and just the way how it pushed you in life.
Yeah, for me, Juice, I think I wasn't running to anything. Like you hear people talking about the money and all of this stuff. I think for me, I was running from something, like the environment that I grew up in. Because I think it's okay to not really do much and to kind of fall in line with what everyone's doing. Not to say that's a bad thing, but for me, I knew I always wanted more. Like I knew I always wanted to do something else. And for me, that avenue was going to be sports.
So I want to dig into, Juice mentioned financial or wealth management, financial literacy. And I've kind of known, even when you were down here and we were working together, you were just starting to kind of explore the banking system and starting to understand that stuff. And you've really made a post-career career in that space. But of late, it seems as if there's a heavy focus on educating athletes and young athletes on how they manage their money and financial literacy and those things. Why is that something that you are so passionate about?
I think I think the more people understand my story and just realize, like, I just fortunately knew that I didn't know. And so just looking at that, with celebrity, you're not usually, as an athlete, you're not usually born into it. You're not educated on it. And a lot of times guys aren't prepared for it.
Right.
And so, when you look at it as a whole, everybody's like, well, how do you make these mistakes? It's like, man, I had no idea what I was doing. And so, as a 23-year-old rookie from Cartersville, Georgia, going to Auburn, and then being in Miami, it's a total shock.
Right.
I'm like, wait a minute, like, how do I do this? And I didn't have anyone in my phone to call and say, hey man, can you help me out? Can you figure out how to help me navigate this lane? And I was watching, Kevin Hart was on a podcast recently with one of my buddies.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about
And he was like, it's so easy when you're from that point of view, but like nobody sees it from your point of view as you're going through it, and the decisions that you challenge with making. And so financially, that was the thing I knew the least about. When I talk about the transition, I knew I had a lot of family, a lot of friends, and people that I wanted to help. But then it's like, well, how do I help?
I think for the most part, these guys are taught to be tough all the time, man, and they sometimes they view it as a sign of weakness when you reach out or ask for help, or you know what I mean. I think a lot of guys now are getting way more in touch with, their feelings in terms of, reaching out for help, and for whatever reason it is, man. I think the NFL does a great job of having those resources as well now. So
yeah, I think it's becoming common to where it's okay to say I'm not okay.
Correct.
With the mental health stuff, I think a lot of people dealing with that, and I think through COVID and all that, it's gained a little bit more attention, and people take it a little bit more seriously. But it's like Juice said, man, it's not being vulnerable, not showing any signs of weakness. And so many guys are like, man, I got to protect myself. And the only way to do that is be closed off and not allow anybody any information that may come back and hurt me. Because on the other end of it, too, the reality of it is business. And so in sports, you realize the sports business, it's not as forgiving as so many would think. No. There's an opportunity to make a lot of money, but from the other side of it, it's like, window. Yeah, man, I still got to understand how to do business within this framework, which that's the other part. Like, nobody ever teaches us that part of it. It's like, man, I'm just trying to play a game, but the game turned into business, and now I need to figure out how to do both.
Let's shift back to your playing days back here a little bit. We've had so much fun with the 2005 class.
Oh man!
That draft class alone has brought us more material, I think, in the fish tank than any other class, man. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit more about with Channing and what he has to say, man. But one of the most famous, or maybe infamous, names in the fish tank this year or period has been Matt Ross. And I mean, do you have any Matt Ross memories? I know a lot of guys do, man. I mean, it's been the Matt Ross stories come in, and we've been trying to find him. If you have any way we can get a hold of him, because he has come in.
Well, I spoke with him for a minute. But
you're right. Then he shut him down.
Then
he shut him down. But Matt Ross in your draft class, of course, Crowder. But what about Matt? Talk a little bit about Matt.
You know, Matt just. I mean, obviously meeting Matt, I'm like, man, this guy crazy. Like, that's the first thing you think about. You know, and one of the toughest football players that I've ever been around. You know, I think just looking at, I forgot what game we were playing, but they kept running power. But they pulled the guard, and they're going to try to kick him out. And Matt was just like, I guess they were running away from him. And he told Coach, man, listen, just put me, all I want to do is smash the guard. Like, that was it.
Find me some content.
And so then they put him over there. And, and talking about a collision, like, that's what he did. But it was funny because, you know, I think as tough as he was, the funniest story comes, you know, with a guy that so many people probably know, Manny.
Manny
Wright.
Which was the same class, right? Because he was drafted in the
supplemental.
supplemental.
I think he came in, in the supplemental draft.
Okay. So technically he was a rookie at the same time.
Yeah, and so I think everyone saw the clip where Manny was crying, what Saban had got onto him. And so, you know, I think that was the persona that everyone viewed Manny as. But just kind of knowing, like, you know, as you hear stuff, like in the locker room, like Manny comes from this environment in L.A. and California where a lot of the people surrounding Manny are like, you know, stone cold, you know, like street guys, people that you really wouldn't want to see on a normal basis. And so a lot of people didn't buy into it because Manny was quiet, didn't say a lot. So Matt just kept getting at Manny one practice, and I guess he just kept chirping at Manny. And obviously, you know, it was after that episode. And so he just kept getting, and so Matt quiet.
And it was after Manny had cried.
Yeah.
And so he's already thinking.
So he was giving him flat, and then so, man, all of a sudden everybody look over, and I think Manny had hit Matt with like a 8-piece combo, like
with a biscuit.
Like, wow. And then I'm like, Matt was red, and I'm like, because you know, you look at Matt, you're like, man, wait a minute.
Wait,
like,
now where was it? This was on the field?
On the sideline, in between, like we out there doing drills, and I guess he just kept calling him names. He kept walking behind him.
Manny had enough.
And I guess Manny finally had enough, and the other side of Manny came out.
Right.
And, man, all I seen, and he was throwing some haymakers, and he hit Rolf with about 3 or 4 of them. And so I was like, okay.
He was not a small man.
Right. But then after that, that's when the Matt Rolf clicked in, and so now we're after practice in the showers, and now Rolf just pacing, and I'm like, man, what's up? And Matt's like, man, that's when we were up in Davie. He's like, man, tell him let's go over here behind these apartments. He's like, I'm gonna break his neck. Like he's like, man, and he just wanted to do like a cage match. Like that's all he was like, man. He's like, I don't care about them punches. Like I just want to go. Tell him to come behind these apartments and we'll finish that.
Right.
And I was like,
we
man,
know the rule is once it's done on the field, it's over,
right?
It's gotta be over, man.
Yeah, but Matt, I think he didn't get that. He didn't get that. But luckily,
the apartments.
Yeah.
The apartments
right across the street from Dave from the
facility.
facility. Like he's like, man, we'll go in the parking lot and we can just make the best man win. And I was like, man, no, like because Stu was gonna get you, but. Yeah, so luckily it didn't go down that way. But
so Juice just mentioned another member of that class, and we know this is your guy, is Channing Crowder. We spent about half your first episode on this show. So really, I guess Channing almost has 3.5 appearances here because he's been on the show 3 times, and we talked about him for half the episode there. And I know how close you guys were. But you just mentioned it, you talked about his podcast. Do you see what this man is doing now? Like, he's become a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, though, like, some people just find their sweet spot. Yeah. Obviously, we all know Channing likes to talk. He's always been a talker from the locker room to, you know, even post-career doing the radio stuff. And so, I mean, he's found that sweet spot. But he's always had that personality, too, that people want to know. And, you know, I used to always joke with him. I'm like, man, you're either one of those people really like you or they want nothing to do with you. Like, there's no in between. But he just says whatever comes up, comes out. Like, that's just how he is. He's always been that way.
But you know that. Like, you know that. But now the whole world knows that, you know? And so and I think people are, like, in shock, and people don't know what to do with what they're seeing. And And would you say this is exactly what you saw day in and day out from the time you set foot here in Miami?
For the most part. Like, we got drafted together in '05, and so obviously a lot of people, even, yourself included, like, man, how you and Crowder hang out? But I think it's just that comfort zone too.
Yeah.
Like, coming from my background, I think that's something that's normal, and I think a lot of times too, like we were talking to, like, you try to run away from that stuff because it's like, man, I want to try to change and be different. But then there's just certain things that you have that's just in your comfort zone.
We'll shift gears or fast forward to our current head coach here with the Miami Dolphins, and Mike McDaniel. I don't know how closely you've followed his career, but as a former running back, when you look at, oh wow, this team, there might be a commitment to the run game here now between the system that he's been in. He was known as like a run game specialist, offensive guru, and you see the running backs that they're bringing in, the offensive line that they're bringing in, the coaches with experience on offensive line. Do you start to almost foam at the mouth as a running back? What do you think about this current team?
I mean, I like the fact that he likes to run the ball. Yeah. And so without knowing personnel, like, I think to be determined, I guess, you look at it, they got a stable of guys that are capable. But, from a strategy perspective, that's what you like, especially the way the game's going. You look at, it's more a pass-heavy game. They want to see the ball go down the field a lot more. The rules allow for that. It's more offense-friendly. But when you get a guy that comes in, focuses on the running game, I think it helps this team.
All right, so one new thing that we have on the fish tank is the 2-minute drill. So we're going to run RB through the 2-minute drill, Big Seth.
In the Wildcat, or is he actually playing tailback?
I think he's going to be in the Wildcat.
Okay.
2 minutes. Even though we probably would not run Wildcat for 2 minutes.
Right.
But
he's in
we're going to put
control.
the ball in our best player's hand right now, and the best player on the set right now is Ronnie Brown.
Okay.
All right?
We got the clock set.
Clock set. Let's get it going.
Is it you or is it me?
I'll go first.
All right.
All right. The greatest rapper in Atlanta of all time. Outkast.
All right. Greatest Miami Dolphins running back of all time.
I like Ricky.
I bet you do.
I like Dreaded
He's in
Ricky.
Wildcat. You better say Ricky right now.
Dreaded Ricky.
Dreaded Ricky. Okay.
Speaking of Wildcat, your most memorable Wildcat moment.
New England,
all
by far.
day.
The first
Yeah.
time we did it, because in my mind, the results happen, but it was just don't mess it up. Just don't mess it up.
Was there one play in that game? Because you had a whole bunch of them.
The very first one, because it just don't mess it up.
Right.
And then after that, it was like, oh man, like this kind of cool. Because I never played quarterback outside of Pee Wee. When they snap it to you, you just run around and try to. But I never played quarterback.
Okay, you're in the wealth management field. You're helping other guys manage their money. What's a former Miami Dolphins teammate who you would actually trust managing your money?
Jason, JT.
JT, okay.
Yeah.
He might give you a call.
Yeah.
He might have an investment opportunity for
He
you.
probably was the most business-minded out of all the
Okay.
guys that I saw. I mean, and he was the guy that kind of initiated me, on this track. I'm like, hey, man, this guy does it all, from community to on the field to just in different involvement, even now coaching. Like, guy that just continues to take strides.
Okay.
Okay, we got one more.
One more quick. All right. Last time you were in the tank, you told us about how you had to carry Ricky around the hotel to find his room. If you were in Ricky's shoes, who on the team would you have carry you to your room?
Crowder.
That's
my
a
guy.
2-minute warning.
That's my guy.
That's his ride or die right there. Crowder would have, I don't know what kind of condition Crowder would have been in, but he would have got you home
He got you
safe.
there. It might have been zigzag, but it'd been good.
Yeah,
What?
we'd have made it.
You'd have made it. That's all that mattered. Probably had a moment or two like that in the history. Well, I see you got the wristband on. You're trying to get back to the water park. We'll get you back home or not home, but back to whatever resort you're staying at before the family misses you. It was great to have you back in the tank, man.
No,
It's been a
always
few-
good, man. I appreciate both of you guys. Obviously,
Hey, thanks for diving in, Ronnie.
I appreciate it.